Um, Welcome to the March chapter meeting. And I'm going to make a few announcements before we get started with excitements tonight. First of all, there's right now we're the last week before the budget is due in the New York State. So on April 1st, actually on Friday, the budget will be finalized. And there's a few actions that you can take to help get some really significant legislation passed. Called one is the All Electrics Building Act, and the other is a Gas Transition Act. I'm assuming you can't push that button on your screen, so I will later drop that into the chat for everybody. And it would be great if you could fill out the form there. It's really great, and it sends letters to the governor and your two legislators. And it looks good. Look, the Senate version of the budget is very good, and the governor is pretty much in alignment. We just need to get the assembly moving in our direction. So with regard to this renewable heat now package that we've been pushing. So that's the first announcement. The second one is that we have the March for Science is coming up on April 23rd at 12 p.m. And for anyone who's interested in that, there were details in the newsletter we sent out on Sunday, but we'll also have more details coming on our social media. And for those of you who haven't joined us on social media, I just want to remind you of the, sorry, why is this moving forward without my permission? Yeah, to join our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts. There's a lot of great information that's included there, and you'll always be in the know on what's going on. So I'm gonna now move to the next page. So the next announcement is about our retreat. And this is a great event. We've been doing it for, I think this is the third year now. And it's for the night of the April 8th, which is a Friday, and then also on the day of Saturday. And these are some of the speakers that we'll have at the retreat. Catherine Coleman Flowers, who's on the board, Tim Ryder, who's from Senator Schumer's office. He's going to talk to us about what's going on at with the climate provisions that were in the Build Back Better Act. Justin Pearson, if you remember, he was at our last our conference 2 months ago, and some other great speakers, including Luis Aguirre Torres, who is the guy who's leading up the Ithaca electrification project. So it's going to be a great event, a lot of great speakers, and it's a great way to actually meet other leaders across the state. So please join that, and there'll be an Eventbrite that I'll put in the chat once the announcements are over, a registration form. And then the last, or maybe the last, I think it's the last announcement, is that Climate Reality is having the next training session. And this will be the first one that's back to in-person, and it's in Las Vegas. It's far away, so they're kind of focusing on people out west. Hopefully the next one will be out east. But if you happen to be out in that area or have plans to go to that area, there's a great opportunity, because these in-person events are just super. And it looks like that at the end. And you can see Al Gore down here at the bottom, and maybe Harriet's there because she was there at one of the first ones. I don't know which one this was, but so yeah, I'll drop that. And if you're not a Climate Reality leader already, I'll drop this in the chat as well once we get into the presentation. Okay, so with that, those were all the announcements, and now I'm going to pass it over to Deepa.
Thanks, Paul. So we like to always start out by just reminding everyone that we like to conduct our meetings in accordance with the Jemez principles. So here they are on the screen for you briefly. If you want to take a second to read over them. I think you move on to the next slide, Paul. So now it's my privilege to introduce our speakers for the evening. In celebration of Women's History Month, we're really proud to have with us two amazing women in climate justice, Harriet Shugarman and Céline Semaan-Vernon. So first up, we have Harriet Shugarman, who is the executive director and founder of Climate Mama. After being trained as a climate reality leader, she established our own New York City Metro chapter and became its very first chair. She has regularly appeared on podcasts and radio shows and has authored numerous writings on climate, including her award-winning book, How to Talk to Your Kids About Climate Change, Turning Angst into Action. And as you can see from her bio on screen, I could go on and on. Instead, I will simply say that we are really delighted to welcome her here tonight. So Harriet, if you'd like to go ahead.
Sure. Thank you so much. I am so happy to be here amongst friends and colleagues. I'm so happy to share the discussion this evening with Céline, who I have only read about, but I am thrilled to learn more about your work, which is incredible. So I look forward to that. And I look forward to our conversation and discussion during our panel as well, and with everyone that's here. And it's nice that it's a small group. Sometimes that can be the most rewarding, and everybody can really participate directly. So when I spoke to Faith about what we're doing, I guess we're just introducing a little bit on the connection with women, and it's Women's History Month and the relationship to climate justice, and then we'll get more deeply into some of our work during this discussions. But I wanted just to say, starting out, that I see this thread, women and climate justice, as so strong and really unbreakable. And for too long, I think women have shared the stage behind the scenes in many respects. And we are only now, in terms of the climate movement, seeing women take a more center stage, as they should be. And I think that goes with women being multitaskers, women being the mothers, the women who work to see how systems change really fits together and is part of seeing how we address these issues. But I wanted just to share a few experiences and a few quotes and a few women who have inspired me, and then we'll get more into details on my specific work, I guess, during the conversation. But I was fortunate in my career. I worked at the United Nations. I was a representative of the International Monetary Fund at the UN, and I went to the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing. And this conference, from the US perspective, was this place where Hillary Clinton had this famous quote where she said, if there's one message that echoes from the conference, let it be that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. And that was back in 1995. I think we aren't there still. It's an important thing that should be. We're not there in our own country. We're not there in other countries as well. But it's something that was very strong in that moment, coming from the United States and coming from our spokesperson there. Personally, for me, at that conference, I had the opportunity to meet with many incredible women from around the world, and our own past Congresswoman at the time, Bella Abzug, who started the Women's Environment and Development Organization that works on uplifting women's roles and connection to climate, and the organization continues strong. And she at that time, asked me some really hard questions about myself, where I was going, understanding fully the connection of this great and incredible group of women that I had the opportunity to be with, and whether I recognized it and realized it. And so that was a special moment for me. I want to also share just a few other women who have touched my life in the past, and more recently as it relates to women and climate justice. One is Wangari Maathai, and I have this quote written down where she says that no matter how dark the cloud, there's always a thin silver lining, and that is what we must look for. The silver lining will come, if not for us, to the next generation or the next, or the one after that. And maybe with that generation, the lining will no longer be thin. And that has carried over in a lot of my work. I had the opportunity a few weeks ago to interview a wonderful filmmaker from our area, from New York. She creates documentary films, and her name is Rachel Lears, and her, some of you may have seen Knock Down the House, I don't know. But this new film on climate justice, on women leading, is called To the End. But it's not out yet. Mark it down, look for our blog on our discussion on Climate Mama with her. But she follows 4 amazing women in the United States. Parksha, Alexandra Roja, Rihanna Gunn-Wright, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as they work on the Green New Deal and making sure that justice is centered in it. So amazing women and an amazing film to look for. And finally, an Alaskan songwriter. And I guess leading into this to the end, when I asked Rachel, where did she come up with that name? And it's because we are going to carry through with this to the end as women, as mothers. And in fact, the film ends with one of the leads who has a baby and who talks about how women have had children at incredibly complicated times throughout life, and that we keep going and can see the hope through our children, even though they're born into very difficult times. And we're at one of those times now. And so there's also an Alaskan songwriter, Libby Roderick, and she wrote this poem. I have it on the wall in my office, a song called Winter Wheat. And I just wanted to read you 2 paragraphs from that. And then I will slow down what I'm saying. But she said that we're sowing winter wheat that other hands will harvest, that they might have enough to eat after we are gone. We are planting shade trees that others will sit under. We will light candles that others can see their way. We'll struggle for justice, though we'll never see it flower. Our children's children will live in peace one day. And I think all of those quotes connect on this idea that we're in this for the long term. My work with Climate Mama in writing the book that I wrote on how to talk to our kids also begins with talking about how we have to get very comfortable with the uncomfortable fact that we'll be living the climate emergency for the rest of our lives. But I think that in women, in many of the women that are working in the climate movement, many of the Indigenous women that are showing us against all odds that they are working to raise up the voices of women around them, to protect and be defenders of forests. Through my work with Women's Earth and Climate Action, I get to see this directly in action. I'm going to put in the chat and share a webinar we had last week called Building Systemic Change, Frontline Women Lead Solutions for Climate Justice, and some of the amazing speakers and resources from that. And with that, I want to just, open it up and say there's amazing, amazing women out there that I'm feel so fortunate and lucky to hear from. I'm excited to learn from Céline as well today. And I know that I was just asked to say a few words. And so I wanted to share words of others now. And I can talk more about our work with Climate Mama, our work with Our Kids Climate, which is a global coalition of parents. And we were just today on a meeting discussing the differences between the global South and global North that we as parents really see and recognize as it relates to war that's happening, as it relates to many things, and how we need to walk in each other's shoes a little bit more. So I look forward to talking about that as well. So thanks, Deepa. I think I will stop with that and turn it over to Céline. Or to you to introduce Céline.
Yeah, thank you so much, Harriet. Céline, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. I'd like to introduce Céline Semaan-Vernon, who's a Lebanese-Canadian designer, writer, advocate, and public speaker. She's the founder of Slow Factory, a nonprofit organization working at the intersection of environmental and social justice. She's also on the council of Progressive International, has been a director's fellow of MIT Media Lab, and served on the board of directors of AIGA New York, an organization that helps cultivate the future of design in New York City. Céline, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Deepa. And thank you, Harriet, for your beautiful introduction. I don't have anything prepared, so I'm just going to introduce a little bit what we do to the audience. And the work that we do in climate justice has been very much informed by our lived experience, all of us within the team. A little bit about what we do. Slow Factory is an institution, a young institution. We turned 10 years young this year in 2022. We're very excited for this milestone because for the past 10 years, we've been working at the intersection of climate justice and human rights. And I know that right now the intersectional work has been, has reached mainstream, if you will, and intersectionality has been discussed often in the context of climate. But when we started, this was not the case. And when we began working with the two sort of sectors coming together, climate and human rights coming together to discuss the issues, the overlapping issues from a holistic perspective to accelerate progress, to accelerate the innovations that are needed in both of these sectors, because oftentimes a situation that is a climate situation, whether it's fuel shortage or water shortage or clean energy, all of these issues are also impacting human lives and human rights. And as you may or may not be familiar with, the hierarchy that exists within the systems that we operate under, that basically creates scarcity around certain access of survival modes, survival techniques, or survival strategies for example, clean water or energy or soil health, or quality of air, etc. So the way that we came to these conclusions, I was born in Lebanon from surviving a war, and just observing it from my lived experience, how the war impacted our environment and also impacted our human rights. And both of them were very much intertwined. So for example, during the war in Lebanon, it's a 30-year-long war, so it's a very long war from the 70s till the 90s, and 60s, in fact, to the 90s. The neighboring countries would dump their waste in our country because we were, in a war. So we couldn't really control these borders. And so waste issues started to rise within the context of a war. Similarly, access to clean water was very, very difficult because obviously as certain facilities were being bombed on purpose, access to water became very difficult. And so why am I talking about this? It's because this is basically the lived experience that I've been in has informed the necessary observation that climate justice and human rights need to be looked at in as one sector, if you will, or at least two sectors coming together, which means there must be some translation from a sector to another and a reconciliation of data points and of strategies to be able to accelerate change, because oftentimes there will be funds and a specific project for climate that completely misunderstood how it's going to be implemented within a society that has hierarchies and has, human rights violations and so on. But that was not our mandate. Here you go. That's what we did, for example. So in Slow Factory, what we do, we operate in 3 different ways. One is by creating what we call open education, or short open EDU, which is essentially a new form of education that is peer-to-peer and that accelerates this type of cross-sector knowledge between human rights and climate justice, and allows for the public or anyone interested. Right now, we have about 28,000 students to learn, to improve their skill sets, to attend these seminars and these classes and these workshops, and to potentially apply some of this climate adaptation type of work into their fields, whether they're working in fashion, because we work primarily in that sector, or they're working in media, or they're working in agriculture, which we also work in. Am I talking too much? What should I do now? Basically, I'm just giving you an idea. So education is one of them. And then we have another pillar, which is narrative change. Narrative change is what we do in public facing, in a public facing manner, we use social media because it's accessible to all. And we create bite-sized information, and we started doing these explainers a little before COVID started, but during COVID, the 2020 break or pandemic, it became very popular. A lot of other groups starting to do these types of explainers to explain things that are happening around the world. And the way that we use them is very much to try to talk about or explain very complex information. Perhaps it's around deforestation, or it's around supply chain, or it's around microplastics. It's basically what we learn in the long form education that we call Open EDU, but we translate it and we create bite size to share with a larger group. Maybe some people don't have time to spend a few hours a day on a class, so they can get a recap, and so on and so forth. So narrative changes here, it's a pillar for us. We do that through art as well. We have an exhibition now at MoMA PS1 called The Revolution is a School. It's closing on April 23rd, and we're doing a big Earth Day celebration. If you all want to join us, it's a free event. And then the last pillar is material science. We fund science and research around new materials that are being developed, and we help new material scientists in basically get into the market, get into scaling their innovation, because like solutions exist. Oftentimes they're in a lab, and we need to create a bridge between the lab and the real world. And that's what the third pillar is.
Great. Thank you so much, Céline. So I have a few questions for our panelists, but in the meantime, if you'd like to ask a question, please do post it in the chat, and we will go through some of those questions later on in the evening. So I'm going to start out with a question about justice. We talked about women in climate justice and the place of justice in the climate movement. And at times in the struggle to address the climate crisis, justice can be ignored or only included in discussions as an afterthought. And I was wondering, what are some of the strategies that you employ to ensure that justice remains a focus of your activism, especially gender justice? And maybe we can start with Harriet.
Sure. I think that oftentimes we see issues of climate justice. What I'm going to talk about my work in education here in the US, perhaps because it could relate to something or be a relevance with Céline's work as well. But in New Jersey and here in New York, as we create, look at the importance of adding curriculum into K through 12 that deals with climate, the justice issue, if you don't have people at the table from the very beginning that are working on that have knowledge of it, that have direct knowledge, as Céline has said, that are working in that space, in the place that you're working with, it gets added in as an afterthought, and it shouldn't be that way. I think from a gender justice perspective, as similarly, women need to be at the table. I think that was the closing, we heard that back in 1995 at the Fourth World Women's Conference. We heard it at the CSW when it ended, the Commission on the Status of Women, when it ended last week. It's at, every COP meeting. And yet still, it tends to sometimes be an afterthought. We see gender equity in those countries that have gender equity with women in leadership roles, where environment and sustainability is front and center in the work of those countries, those companies. In my work with We Can, also, we have a page on the site that says why women. And I think that also goes more deeply into why women need to be at the table from the very beginning. I think in the youth climate movement, both globally and here in the United States, who has risen up as the leaders there are young women from the very beginning. Again, not to diss any of our male colleagues here as well, too, but there's a lot of data and science and work on why that is critically important. So anyways, let me stop there, pass it over to Céline, and I'm going to put in the chat some of our resources from weekend from last week.
Definitely. I just feel like maybe I need a refresher on the question because I was following you and I was, I don't really
Of
know
course.
where we ended.
Sure. So the question was, at some times in the struggle to address the climate crisis, the issue of justice can be ignored or only included as an afterthought. So what are some of the strategies that you might use to ensure that justice remains a focus of your activism, and especially gender justice?
Yes, of course. Thank you for that question, Deepa. You know, as you said in the beginning, justice has often been sort of erased, if you will, from the climate justice movement because primarily the climate justice movement became popular in the global north through a conversation just on basically climate, just on climate, not on other overlapping issues, as I mentioned in the beginning. And it was also championed by, scientists from the global north that are coming from a specific demographic. And because of their lived experience, they were not necessarily looking at justice from the same central point as other people who are championing the same topics are more inclusive of. And in terms of justice, how we, for example, address it within our work, and specifically gender justice and racial justice for us go hand in hand. We are not only centering, but we are also funding, platforming people of the global majority, people that are Black, Brown, Indigenous, minority, ethnic scholars, teachers, scientists, researchers that are not necessarily coming from the global north and not coming at all from a certain demographic that is more dominant and more affluent. And so that's how we address it, is by curating, supporting, platforming, and funding other groups of people that are oftentimes purposefully underrepresented and purposefully under-resourced because of the way that the merit of a certain scientist or a certain pedigree in climate justice requires impossible hierarchies that are not necessarily valid when it comes to including justice and including knowledge with a capital K that exists and is necessary outside of the institution. So that's how the Slow Factory addresses the justice point that you mentioned, Deepa. And again, we don't look at it just as justice in general. Justice is by design. It is a design flaw. It is designed this way. Those systems that we are trying to carefully dismantle have been designed this way. There is several layers of hierarchies that we have to navigate in order to be credible or not within a specific sector. And the Slow Factory looks at other types of ways to look at credibility, and our framework to understand what is a credible source and what is an important voice don't necessarily align, if you will, with traditional forms of hierarchies.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I'd like to continue with a question on education. Both of you mentioned education, which is also at the heart of Climate Reality Project and a big part of activism for both of you. So I was reading a little bit about Slow Factory's many different educational initiatives, like landfill as museums and the study hall program and the idea of waste-led design. And I thought it was just really fascinating. And I was wondering if Céline, you could talk a little bit more in detail about these initiatives.
I'll talk about landfills as museums because it's a bit strange and also very important because it also reflects this idea of a lived experience versus a theory that you have read in a book. So what we do with landfills as museums, we treat museums as we treat landfills, as museums, as future archaeological finds, because they will, whether we like it or not, outlive us all. And the future people that are going to find us through the mountains and mountains of waste that we are leaving behind us will have a very interesting take on our lifestyle, our values, the way we lived on this planet. And so we take a small group of folks. Some of them are designers, some of them are students, and we take them to the landfills to experience it. And we survey them before they go to the landfill, and we ask them, how does the landfill make you feel? How does climate justice make you feel, or climate change? And of course, the results are very, very sad. In the beginning of the trip, I'm depressed, it's disgusting, I'm ashamed, and all of these words come up. And then we go to the landfill and we walk on literally everyday items that we've probably used that very day, like a cup of coffee, a toothpaste, a shoe, a t-shirt, a bra, a yogurt, a wrapper of a sandwich. Anyway, we walk on our day basically. And through this walk, there is a cognitive shift that occurs in the mindset of the participants, whether they're designers or not, where they start looking at the end of life of every single item first. And that process, we call it a waste-led design process, which means waste is introduced in the beginning of the process. It's not a taboo, it's not a hot potato syndrome that we're throwing around hoping that someone will take care of it. We take care of it from the beginning of the inception of our ideas, of our understanding of our systems. Then after this field trip, if you will, we sit down together and we explore the anatomy of a landfill and what happens when we pilot up all of these things together, what's happening. And then eventually we also conduct the participants into a waste-led design workshop. So in that workshop, they are invited to design systems that are regenerative, not only circular, because there's a lot of items in that landfill that are designed as circular. They were designed to be recycled, but they never were because the items are not all recyclable, etc. So that's one of the projects, and it's something that we had to stop because of COVID, but we are hoping to revive very soon because honestly, after we surveyed the participants after the trip, and same questions, there's a lot more hope and a lot more focus and a lot more inspiration that occurs after this trip. And that's what we ultimately need to be creating, you know, like more inspiration, innovation, and hope, so that we can come up with these solutions that that are needed. There are tears also during the event.
That's amazing. That's something that I think most people don't think about doing, is visiting a landfill. And it's such an important part of our systems. And yet, like justice, it becomes an afterthought. So I think it's really amazing what you're doing with that. For Harriet, I also have a question around education, a little bit different. You mentioned actually that about the efforts to include climate change education in schools. And we recently had Emily Fano presenting on climate and resilience education task force in New York City. And also last year, New Jersey became the first state in the country to require public schools to adopt climate change as part of the core curriculum. And parents are often told that our children's education continues in the home. And as someone who has written about parents talking to children about climate change, what do you think is the best way for parents to reinforce and complement the climate change education that takes place in schools?
It's a great question, Deepa. And I wanted just before, because tomorrow actually, so I'm also a professor, I am going out and talking about waste and garbage. So in terms of Céline's landfill, I just want to ask all of you to think about this for a minute. Where does our garbage in New York City go? Do you know? And from a justice perspective, to think about that. And I can fill that in after. So because we are talking about that tomorrow. So I'm not sure people think of it out of sight, out of mind. Parents and the role that we have, you know, every parent comes at it from a different place where they're at in that moment in their lives, right? We've lived this experience with COVID. Many people have had challenges with jobs, with employment, with rent. And to ask a parent to take on that role of being the teacher, again, I think as Céline really put it in such a good way too, right? Our lived experiences inform us in many ways. And from those experiences, we might assume people can have more time, more energy to teach about the climate crisis, but similar to problems that we have with teachers actually teaching it. Emily has done wonderful work with a task force. And one of the things that, and I'm on that task force, one of the things that was done in the last year was this a survey of all New York City public school teachers, 70,000 teachers. We had, I think, 1,300 responses. How many, and it was asking teachers in every category who taught about the climate crisis. And I think it was 52% of the teachers taught, but many of them only for maybe an hour or 2 hours a week. And so even the teachers, and the reasons why they weren't teaching it, and that was often more often in the science classes, not in arts, I see a question in the chat from Regina, which critically important. We tell our stories. We learn to be storytellers through song, through dance, through many different ways, but we aren't training the teachers. We aren't providing the curriculum. And so what about the parents? They need to be, we live in this very divided country, depending on where you stand with your political beliefs can be how serious you take the climate crisis, even though even here, everywhere, we are living that emergency now. So we have to also prepare parents as well to be able to do that. So, I'm making a long story which should be a short answer to your question, Deepa. And clearly I wrote a book about it. I do believe that we as parents have that responsibility, just as we have a responsibility to talk to our kids, when it's the right time, when they ask the questions about, is Santa Claus real, when, or about sex education. I mean, the teaching about climate and should be part of a children's, learning formally and informally from when they're just learning to talk and walk to, when they're children, when they have children of their own and they come at it at different points of time. And I think then we as a parent have a responsibility to be ready to learn, but we can't put that on all parents who might not be able to do that. And that's why I think, especially in our country and here in New York and our metro area, we can put that responsibility on our teachers, but we have to recognize what they've gone through the last few years and provide them with the training and with the teaching and with the background and with the resources. So actually Governor Murphy's budget included a $5 million budget line item that would include exactly that. Also with informal education, I mean, it should be more, but it's something, that's a real amount of money. Where is that in our New York City, our New York State budget? It isn't there. And so there is more we can push from a legislative perspective to help both parents, and Climate Reality can play a role too in holding sessions and seminars so that parents can hear it from a perspective on how you can teach it to kids at different ages too. I think there's lots we can do in our own community here. So thanks for the question, a long-winded answer.
That was great. And I think you make a really good point about throwing support behind an idea that we can require things in the curriculum, but without putting financial backing and more heft behind it, things are not going to happen. So that's an excellent point. Okay, so I think it was Céline, you mentioned earlier having a lived experience through war. And so I have a question around that. So as we are closing out Women's History Month, we're also witnessing historical carnage unfolding in Ukraine. And this war is impacting Ukrainian women and their children in ways ranging from the shocking destruction of the maternity hospital in Mariupol to the plight of nearly 4 million international refugees. So what lessons can we take from this war that are useful in dealing with the expected resource-driven conflicts caused by climate change?
Yes, what's the question though?
So the question is, what lessons can we take from this war that are useful in dealing with the conflicts that are expected, the resource-driven conflicts that will be caused by climate change?
Yes. I mean, in the case of Ukraine, as we are seeing, women and children are becoming refugees of the war, are becoming the first to evacuate the region and to experience being displaced, being uprooted, which is also what my mother and I experienced in my lifetime, to having been forced to leave because to protect our safety. But what we are looking here also is, you know, a war that has made mainstream. There are other wars that that are not even being talked about. Yemen, Syria, it's been over 14 years, Palestine. And this inequality, since we're discussing justice here, and certain women that matter over other women that don't matter. For instance, also I forgot Afghanistan, the Uyghur women in China. You know, these topics are not discussed at all. If in fact you have to follow certain groups of people to know, or certain organizations to know what is happening, because the mainstream media is not going to be portraying certain women as human, in fact, deserving dignity, deserving refugee status. But the war in Ukraine is showing an ideal version, although a terrible apocalyptic situation, but an ideal version of it, where borders are opening and refugees and women and children are finding safety in neighboring countries, which is not the case, again, for Syrian women, Palestinian women, Yemeni women, and Afghani women, and so on. So again, when we're talking about sometimes gender justice, we forget that it's also a racial justice, that we need to talk hand in hand. And Kimberly Crenshaw, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, popularized and discussed at length intersectionality, and basically defined that terminology and that term, so that we can look at overlapping issues when it comes to gender and race in America, of course, but we can look at the same situation abroad, and what sorts of laws exist to open and prevent, I mean, to create a safe environment for women and children, and what laws exist today to create even more of a dangerous situation for women and children. So I don't have an answer, I just have questions. What are the laws that exist today that allow for certain people to pass and have a safe ground, for instance, as a refugee, and other laws that exist that discard the same rights, human rights, and also how they are connected to environmental rights, and that exist around the world, that are preventing women and children that are not coming from Europe, that are being, you know, not looked at from the international community and not taken care of from an international community point of view.
I think you said that you didn't have an answer, but I think you just did give us an answer. You know, one of the lessons that we can learn is that we need to still focus on being just in situations like this, in these resource-driven conflicts, to really truly ensure that justice is centered in these conflicts, and in the solutions to these conflicts, in dealing with refugees and open borders and so forth. So I think you did answer the question. Harriet, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
Well, just, you know, on Celine's point, as I mentioned earlier, I was on a call today with we have a global coalition made up of these two groups, one, Parents for Future Global, which is, you know, an offshoot of the Fridays for Future movement, and then Our Kids Climate. And we have many Global South, Global North parents on those calls and part of the network. And this is something very real and concerning for many of our colleagues in the global South that, I mean, it's terrible, right? What's happened in Ukraine is outrageous. There's half of the population is on the move, but there was a Nigerian mother on our call today, and she put up on the screen, you know, there was a terrorist attack of a train in Nigeria. 1,000 people were on it. It was surrounded. Have you heard anything about that in the media? I mean, in our Western media, or, you know, and you talk about, you mentioned, Deepa, a part of your question, these are resource-driven wars, right? It's all about, this is a fossil fuel war. This is a war, you know, that's funded by fossil fuels. And we've seen that in Middle Eastern wars. Why was the US in Afghanistan? Why, you know, was it in Kuwait? We need to not, you know, we have a choice now, and it's a stark choice. And this war has broken that open in a very, and I think it's not just because of the circles, of the climate circles I'm in, but the dependence of the global North to fossil fuels and running everything is really clear. And we have a choice, and it's been made clear to us from many voices as well, that we shouldn't be signing some all of the above guarantee through our administration through 2030, committing us to give LNG gas that would, you know, decimate many communities on a justice level in Pennsylvania, in Texas, in Louisiana, and exacerbate the climate crisis. There's a short-term resource need. You know, why is gas so expensive? Everyone thinks it's somehow related, you know, to what our president has done. It's all about the oil and gas companies. And so we need to make it about that, about what they're doing. We have the supply for a temporary basis, but we shouldn't get into any long-term commitments. And we need to fight against that narrative. That's a false narrative, right? We can, it's an opportunity for us to hasten forward our move into renewables, our move into electrification of everything, our move to assist you know, the world in that respect, or we can just double down on fossil fuels. And that would be, you know, just probably one of those final nails in the coffin that Mr. Gore talks about, you know, pushing us over that climate cliff. So it is a really amazing opportunity with the International Panel on Climate Change report from the 28th, and the one that's coming out next Monday, the next working group report, right? What do we need to do? This one coming out next week is on mitigation. You know, it's going to talk about further. We need to have that very fast transition. And it's driving more, creating refugees the world over in the Ukraine, but beyond that as well. And if this is what shone the light on that for, you know, the places around the world that are in places of conflict, we should bring the narrative there as opposed to some of the places that maybe it's going. So anyways, again, I am saying too much, but let me stop.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. So I would like to give an opportunity for other members to ask questions here. So I don't know, Regina, I know you've been monitoring the chat. So do you have any questions from the chat that you'd like to pose to our panelists?
Yeah, definitely. One of the questions that came through my vision is not so good. Yeah, so it's interesting you were speaking to war, which is one of the worst things that man can do for the planet in many different ways, both in terms of destruction. We see all the buildings that are being destroyed in Ukraine. And of course, to rebuild concrete cement is a very carbon emitting process. The planes used to fly over and drop bombs, also using fossil fuel, the tanks using fossil fuel. Why am I bringing this up? I mean, I think it's really great and important and imperative that women are getting involved. We need a seat at the table. But at the same time, what does that really do when like one man can declare war on a country? Or when one man in China can say, well, we're going to increase our reliance on fossil fuels. I mean, I think it's great that women are speaking up, but in the reality, are we just like shouting into the wind? I mean, let's get real. Who has the power here? And so I guess what I'm wondering is, we have to do it. We can't just sit idly by. On the other hand, and the real, if we're really looking at it, we have to, I would ask, what difference does it make? Knowing it's important, but at the same time, what difference does it make?
Regina, is it your question, what difference does it make having women at the table? Is that the bottom line of what you're asking?
In the end, because it doesn't necessarily seem to me that it correlates to power. It doesn't necessarily correlate to power.
Well, I would disagree. Well, I would say that, I mean, again, that's where.
I'm being devil's advocate, by the way.
No, fair enough. And there are too many men in power in certain countries. I think when you have more equity, there's many studies that show, as it relates to war too, as a parliament has more women, the likelihood of going to war, is that much less. Or there are ways that women negotiate and have conversations about solving solutions that isn't about, directly going to war. We have vestiges. We're living through a time of, this current war seems to be from another century, this one that's happening there. But, the wars that we saw in Syria, many of the refugees at the border in our south, those are climate wars. Those are things that are happening because of our climate crisis. And I think more women in positions of power, we need to push that. We need to have that in the corporate world. We need to have women running for office, and they change the narrative when there's more women at the table, when there's more women in parliament. So let me hand it over to Céline, and I could go on that one, but I think that we have the data that shows that that's actually a reality. When we have more women in those positions of power, it does change.
I mean, I put Angela Davis's quote there because honestly, at the end of the day, we have to be irrational at a certain point, because if we are looking at it from a very rational point of view, we're missing out on so many opportunities to mobilize and to change, as you said earlier, Harriet, narratives, to create and build power amongst one another. I mean, maybe they are not as strong as stopping the war, but they are healing and feeding and nurturing and protecting and saving, and that is not nothing. And of course, when you look at it against the war, of course, it's nothing. We're dying anyway. But when you look at it against life, we are winning, So that's, I think, how we have to look at it. And where I say we have to be irrational, because we are oftentimes looking at things against the most horrible thing that can happen. And that's where we feel like we're losing. But I think we have to change our perspective and look at it towards what we're saving and what we are working towards, which is life, life and our communities and our cultures. And we are contributing when we are looking at it this way. And why are we supporting women in this situation? Because women are holding their communities, while men are being isolated and forced to battle. Women are holding the children, the elders, they're feeding, they're nurturing, they're organizing, and they are protecting and preserving. And that's what we are here to highlight and to platform.
Thank you. In terms of looking at doing the actions and not really focusing on the outcome, I really like how you both spoke to the importance of empowerment through creativity, through connection, through getting voices out there and getting people to understand. And I think that's where women can be really strong as well, because when I've been to a few of the COPs and the conferences on climate change, and so many of the discussions tend to be, I don't know what you would call it, jargony, fact-based, narrow in scope, I guess, devoid of humanity, you know, lacking in creativity. And what would you say to the people who are not only here tonight, but maybe who may be watching this video at another time? What can they do creatively to share their narrative story of the climate crisis?
Let me just, my message in my book and in our work at Climate Mama, you know, we are going to be living the climate crisis for the rest of our lives. And whatever it is that you're passionate about, we need you to channel that passion through the lens of the climate crisis. And because, you know, I think as Céline said, we need to be radical in our transformation, in our hope. You know, there are different kinds of hope, and in my book I talk about that too. And you know, that in its primary form, radical hope. When there's no hope, we still continue and we move on. And so wherever you're at in your feelings about the climate crisis, working together and working in ways, right? This linear, it's not a linear progression anymore. There's not do 1, 2, and 3. We're too far down the road of many disasters. But there are incredible solutions that are coming out from the artist space, from storytelling, from all over the world. And we should be looking more to those solutions than to the disasters that unfold, I think. We focus too much on the impacts and not enough on what is happening to really create that radical transformation. So I think personally, you know, if we all move through our passion and find ways to use that, we can help build and move that radical transformation to a place where it will happen sooner and faster.
So beautifully said, Harriet. Thank you. If I may share some wisdom from the Global South. There's something, if you ever have traveled anywhere in the Global South and you try to buy a piece of bread at a bakery, maybe, I don't know if you've experienced that, but you would see that no one stands in line. No one makes a straight line to go to buy something. Everyone just rushes. And it's a case by case. You have an eye contact with the person at the, the cashier, and you are, you know, also reading the room and seeing who needs help, and you support them. And maybe there's an elderly person or someone with disability. And so you're very much interacting with one another and looking at things as they're happening. You're reading the room. And these qualities, I think, are needed in this type of, you know, next phase of our survival, where it's not a standardized solution. It's a case-by-case solution. So whatever you could do from where you're at, read the room, basically, figure out who you need to uphold and who you need to help and to support. What are the community members that you can be of service to, and have this radical generosity that is very typical of the Global South that I don't think exists in the West at all, which is give without expectation. Because if you give without expectation, that is how you are creating a way that is basically a way forward. At this point, we can't just transactionalize our way into climate justice. We're not going to get there like that. So these are some of the wisdoms that I would like to share from my part of the world that I think is definitely missing in the West. And when we are looking at solutions, oftentimes we are looking at very highly individualistic solutions that are to eat clean and to wear nothing from a fast fashion group, and all of these very high standards that are almost impossible to uphold when you're not having all your needs met. Okay, so how can we be kinder and more generous and read the room and figure out with your eye contact, basically, how you can be like supporting and being of service and doing things without having something in return necessarily.
I mean, that was so beautiful. You know, I really like the idea of like this next phase. I mean, it really is. We are walking into the next phase of our human existence. We're in the Anthropocene. There's no turning back. And I guess basically in terms of, I feel like you answered a lot of it, but I just wanted to know if you had any closing thoughts, the two of you, on, weathering this spiritually and psychologically, and being able to stay strong throughout, because we're going to have endless challenges, as Harriet, as you say, that this is going to be with us the rest of our life. And we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of climate migration, wars, geopolitical upset. So do the two of you have any closing thoughts, and also any ideas on how to be able to soldier, I don't want to use that word soldier, make our way through this in a positive way? Harriet?
Yes. I think we have to, we hear a lot of buzz about self-care. And again, when I talk to my colleagues in the global South, I have a colleague in South Africa, a friend, and she's like, you guys talk about, climate anxiety and mental health. She's like, what, I don't have time to think about those things. And so, but we are here, in whatever lived experience you're at. And we do need to take care of ourselves, wherever that is. And she tells me she does yoga and gets the massage, every once in a while, and wherever we are, it isn't trite to say that we all need to take care of ourselves. This is a heavy burden that we carry, those of us in this room. Read the room here. All of you are climate reality leaders or members of the chapter. We know what's ahead. But we also know what we can do. And I think from that perspective, what keeps me going and really makes me believe is I look to the future. I see my children who are young adults now. I see them growing old. I see them finding someone that loves them as much as I do. I see them doing fulfilling work that helps the world. And that then we must have a planet that's livable. And that's because now, as you said, Regina, we are at this great turning, as Joanna Macy calls it. We're at this moment of transition. We are alive at this moment. And so we should celebrate that, right? That we know it, we're here, and we can be part of that in whichever way, we can find a way to do that. And we shouldn't do it alone. We should travel together. And we need to find affinity groups, people that we can help, can work with to move that. And again, there are as many ways forward as there are, people on the planet, because there is no linear way forward. So I would close with that.
And I would love to add to that, we also need to center different types of people. We in the Middle East have been living a climate disaster for the past 40, 50 years now. We have not successfully survived it like the West, but we have found a lot of ways and a lot of strategies that could benefit all of us collectively. And I'm just talking from my perspective as a Middle Eastern woman, but there are other perspectives from frontline communities around the world, in the global South, in here on the mainland, in the US, in Hawaii, there are other cultures and other ways of dealing with what we are seeing that is not necessarily the sort of a certified way or the verified way. There are, and I would like to end with this idea that I don't even know what the word is, because diversity and inclusion are so overused right now, but are you being radically generous in the ways that you're approaching this? Are you reading the room and allowing other people to be platformed? And are you supporting alternative perspectives enough to allow them to express what needs to be expressed and have the tools that they need to have so that they can bring forth a solution that is different from the solution we are used to in the West? And I think that's doing that as we collectively collapse would be very good, because maybe we will be able to extend that fatal point, and in the same time, maybe the whole exercise is to learn how to live with each other,
I really like that. Thank you so much. Being together as we collectively collapse. I think that is like really, really well said and so incredibly important. And, you know, maybe it's the highest calling of what we have out of all of this. And I just want to thank you both so much from the bottom of my heart for being here tonight. I mean, I got so much out of it. I got so much inspiration. You know, we have your links and we'll be including them on the website. So yes, thank you so, so much. And, you know, I just want to remind everyone that we'll be back next month. What's the date that we'll be back, Paul?
It's April 26th.
April 26th. Yes. So Céline, Harriet, amazing. Thank you. Forever in our hearts. Do you, Paul or Deepa, have anything you want to add before we close out?
If you have time, I know there was another question in the chat that came up from Keisha. I hope I'm saying your name correctly, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to answer her question.
I can jump in quickly and ask. Hi, Céline. Nice to see you again. I think I last saw you at a sustainable glitter event at Public Records. I just want to know how the Slow Factory Institute was doing. I think that's one of the most groundbreaking and genuinely innovative things in the climate space that's happened in New York for a while. I know that you have been fundraising, and apart from donating and spreading awareness, are there monthly gatherings or ways that we can continue to support the Slow Factory Foundation? Because I think that could be, you know, the answer to a lot of the education, at least, challenges that we're experiencing.
You're on mute, Céline.
I said, wow, great question. Thank you so much, Keisha. Thank you for asking. It's building utopia, you know, like I was literally talking to someone on my team today and we were very sad and almost feeling like we are crazy, basically trying to do this. Crazy is not the right word, but like out of our minds. Because every time we pitch this idea to donors, to investors, they're like, really? Like, how are you going to do? Are we really needing that? Do you have some numbers? And so on and so forth. And we have been relying on the generous donations of the public because honestly, it's so simple. We need alternatives. We need innovation in climate justice. I was talking to someone else who was able to understand that, yes, we do need to nurture utopia at this point. And yes, we do need an institute like this that inputs waste and outputs new systems. Because, you know, everyone's talking about the robots are going to take over. And the only reason why they won't be taking over is if we nurture creativity, community, innovation, compassion. And that's exactly what the school is doing, this institute that we are building. And, you know, sometimes like a day like today, like literally minutes before this call, I was with one of my leadership, with my leadership team, one of the person on my leadership team. And we were both like, wow, how are we going to do this? Because it seems impossible. And yeah, I feel like we have to act as if it's possible and be diligent in what we are building and, you know, continue building this because it is needed. I'm sorry, it's not like the most inspiring message because we are a bit defeated. I'm not going to lie. I mean, we are trying to swim and build against all the currents possible, the capitalist current, the colonial current, the, you know, wealth inequality current, the waste current, every current possible. And we're trying to create an institute that is going to be, you know, doing climate adaptation, but applied climate adaptation to several different industries that we're supporting. And it is building utopia, and and maybe it ends up being a book and we fail dramatically and someone else learns from our mistakes, or we end up doing it. And at this stage, I'm very vulnerably asking for support, donations. If you believe in it, share it. You know, I know it's needed. And of course, I know it's needed because we all know it's needed. Like when we see it, we're like, yes, of course, the industry is going to be changing because of climate. So how do we adapt to this change? What are the new jobs going to look like? Do we have waste management included in all of the brands? Absolutely not. Are we able to build from what is already there? Because all of these panels end up by saying, use what you already have. But do we know how to use what we already have? No. Every single panel ends with, let's collaborate. Do we know how to collaborate across sector? No. And every panel ends up being like, oh, waste is an issue. We need to sort out and have a zero waste. Do we know how to build zero waste within our industries? The answer is also no. And the way that we are observing the industry shifting and changing is by seeing that essentially there are new jobs that are going to be needed. Climate adaptation is a whole new field that we need to support. Pollution reduction, energy efficiency, new systems that are regenerative. And that's what this institute is teaching. And how do we teach it? Because we are centering and listening to people from the global majority that have built this before in microsystems, in medium-sized systems, in governmental systems that worked in their countries and that could work for industries that are going to be implementing them and adapting them. And it's a peer-to-peer model that accelerates innovation and accelerates this type of applied climate justice that we need to look at. How do we actually apply it right now? Because it's not applied, it's theory. So please support us. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing so vulnerably. And I, on behalf of everybody who cares about climate and climate in New York City, thank you for what you're doing. Do not lose hope. We will keep finding ways. And I know that the current is strong against you, but I think that we don't know how to collaborate and build community. So maybe there's a chance for Climate Reality and Slow Factory to work together. Yeah, we can be in touch, but thank you for what you're doing and keep us updated on it.
Thank you so much. I will. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you everyone who was here tonight. Thank you, Kashia, for your great question. Thank you for our guests. And we look forward to seeing all of the Climate Reality leaders at our next monthly meeting, April 27th. So thank you everyone and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much. This was a very beautiful conversation. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, everyone.